Hey guys, how you doing? Sometimes I make two videos in a day. I don't know if it's a good thing to do or not, but here I go. Somebody asked on one of the forums that I regularly visit, can someone explain the difference between being a liberal and a leftist? I was raised in Alberta, and I didn't even know there was a difference. Yeah, my experience too, friend. I come from small town Portage Prairie, Manitoba. I didn't really understand the difference between liberal, leftist, any of this kind of stuff. I kind of had a glimmering idea of what a socialist was. So I thought I'd just quickly make this video for you, bud, just because I got the time, I got the and I got the know-how. Okay, and I'm gonna be as nice as I can. I'm a very opinionated person, but I'm gonna be as nice as I can to all these political spectrums. So, um, the terms conservative, liberal, socialist, leftist, communist, right, and anarchist, and all of them are all in relation to the capitalist system that we all live under. Okay, the capitalist system is itself the idea that there should be an employer, right, and an employee. That's the central defining characteristic of capitalism. That there are owners who own the land, own the means of production, own the businesses, own these places, and they employ employees who largely do not own much of anything, right? Maybe they own like a small house or maybe a parcel of land or something, but certainly they don't own anything on the scale that we're talking about. Like um, the wealthiest man in Canada, David Thompson, he is a capitalist, certainly, because he owns most, like a good deal of the shares that exist in Canada. But his employees, the people who work for him, likely are not capitalists. They just are beholden to the system of capitalism. Okay, so that's capitalism. That's the system that we live under. If you are a conservative, you generally see this as a beneficial system that doesn't really need to change or be reformed, right? That's the conservative position. They want to conserve the system that exists. If they do change things, if they do alter things, it's in small ways to, and they don't want the government really to get in the way, right? That's conservatism. Liberal is slightly on the other side of that, still believing that capitalism is largely a net good for the society, that capitalism is beneficial, but however, that capitalism needs to be reformed, right? Conservatives will say no, capitalism doesn't need to be reformed, and in fact, some brands of conservatism will even pull you back far. Like, this is where your like free market capitalism comes from, right? This is a very kind of conservative idea that we just need more capitalism. We just need more of that, right? The government needs to go away. Central planning and central governance needs to go away. And we just need to let the free market decide. Very conservative idea. A liberal position would be, okay, well, we do need to have like inspectors, right? That's a very liberal kind of idea that, like, okay, capitalism is good fundamentally, but we need to ensure that it's constantly being looked at. We need to ensure that it's constantly in a state of reform, or that it is being reformed. And the way that liberals tend to do this is through piecemeal, very small, tiny reforms to the system overall, and generally in response to the demands of the populace. So, uh, a classic difference between conservative and liberal. And it's important to know the difference between conservative and liberal in this structure so that you can understand the difference between liberal and leftist, right? So, like, it's liberal governments traditionally that'll do things like raise the minimum wage, right? And then it's conservative governments that'll come in and tend to pull back on the minimum wage, right? Liberals will tend to move union rights and things like this slightly, and I do mean, like, we're talking like slightly forward. Whereas conservatives want to pull it back, generally speaking, right? That's why conservatives don't really stay in power for very long and are very unpopular typically, because the populace doesn't like it when they lose things. And the liberals, of course, have enough power. This is where that struggle between the two comes. Anyway, okay, so we've done it. But fundamentally, the fundamental thing to remember is that liberals, like conservatives, are both allied in that single idea that capitalism is fundamentally good. They're just having a minor disagreement about how much capitalism we should have or how involved the government should be in the capitalist system. So along come the leftists, okay? So the socialist position and the communist position generally is that the relationship that exists within capitalism, that is, that there is an employee and an employer, that there is an owner who owns everything, and people who work for them who own basically nothing, that this relationship is fundamentally antagonistic, right? And that this is the central antagonism that exists in our society. So a great example of this is in the basic income conversation. You'll hear people say all the time, well, if you raise the basic income, right, then they'll just raise the rent, okay? This really highlights the central antagonistic relationship that exists between the employee and the employer, right? The employer wants to pay the employee as little as possible and wants them to pay as much as possible for goods, services, rent, these sorts of things. And if at all possible, the employer would like to put the employee in debt so that the power dynamic is perpetual and permanent. Leftists find this to be intolerable. That and there are many degrees by which leftists would like to alter this particular arrangement. And let's be very clear, everything revolves around this particular antagonistic relationship. Everything else is somewhat superfluous. And this is why you see, for example, liberals will really double down on social issues, your right to be gay, your right to minority rights, right? Gender rights, these sorts of things. But they basically fundamentally agree with conservatives in economic rights. Whereas a leftist will take a look at those same social issues on the left and be like, yes, we need to have those, while also addressing the central economic antagonism that exists in our society. So, for example, the socialist solution, right, is to transfer, or that the workers own the workplaces, right? Also a communist idea, right? That we should seize the means of production. I'm sure you've heard this phrase before. That workers should actually own the businesses they work for, right? Because currently it's owners who own all the shares, decide everything, and it essentially turns businesses into tyrannical dictatorships, right? That's how they're structured. Whereas a socialist and a communist would say, well, why don't the workers own the businesses? And I actually believe this could be achieved fairly easily. We just need the political will to do it. And it could be achieved by transferring the shares that are currently owned by the capitalist class to the working class. So it's actually the workers who own the shares to the places they work at. Then they would vote instead of these sort of capitalist shareholders who, in my view, don't really do anything. They just sort of are rich and collect money from our productivity for doing not much of anything. And so this is the fundamental difference between a liberal and a leftist, right? A liberal looks at the capitalist system that exists and says, we will work with the capitalists and we will work on behalf of the capitalists in order to maintain the capitalist system, but we will respond to the demands of the populace in small, piecemeal reform ways, which is different from the conservatives who are saying, we work for the capitalists, you should work for the capitalists too, get a job, you lazy bum. If only you did better, then you'd be better. Which is why the conservatives don't really seize power for very long. and only really typically tend to seize power when the liberals stop doing what they're supposed to do and start acting like conservatives, right? Which is the liberals stop actually forming piecemeal reform. They stop actually responding to the populace in that way. And so people just go, well, then we might as well vote in the conservatives, get rid of these guys. And leftists, like, people are mistrustful of leftists, generally speaking, and that's for a very Machiavellian reason, right? It's uncertainty. People don't really know what will happen if, well, the workers have control over it. Oh well, and they've bestowed some kind of divine power to the capitalist class, which of course the capitalists are well propagandizing everybody. So what the heck? Anyway, to the point of your question, the central difference, okay, is that liberals are totally fine with the employee-employer dynamic that exists in our society, which is the central antagonism of our society, which should be resolved, while leftists are not okay with that. Leftists seek to resolve that central antagonism, right? Typically, ideas range from things like a basic income, right, where we could, but that's just sort of a piecemeal reform situation, whereas someone like myself looks at something like a transfer of shares away from the capitalist class to the working class, and just the wholesale elimination of that central antagonism. And that, to me, is the difference between a leftist and a liberal. We could get into, like, the many differences that exist within the leftist spectrum, and they range from, like, well, the state should own these businesses, and then people can have a democracy, and that's how they influence it, to no, the workers should have direct control over these businesses, while still electing representatives that way, to I mean, you want to go like full anarchist, right? Like, then you're talking about, like, everything is controlled on a very one-to-one sort of basis. I'm not that, I don't know that much about anarchism, so I'm not gonna say much more of it that way, but there's an array of ideas that exist within the leftist spectrum, but they all really do exist to focus on this central question of how do we deal with the central antagonism of our society, which is that there are employers, owners, and employees, serfs, basically. Yeah, I hope that answers your question, bud. Hey, well, I've got your attention. This is my YouTube channel. Hi, subscribe. I hope you're doing well, okay? Good luck. I hope that answered your question.